The blood on Victoria Morgan's dress had dried to a rust-brown stain that marked her as either victim or perpetrator, and she prayed no one would look close enough to wonder which. She stumbled through the Colorado wilderness in September of 1872, her lungs burning with each ragged breath as pine needles crunched beneath her torn boots. 3 days had passed since she fled Denver. 3 days since she'd watched her husband Thomas beat a man nearly to death in their kitchen for the crime of delivering mail to their door. 3 days since Thomas had turned those same fists on her when she dared to interfere. And 3 days since she'd made the split-second decision that changed everything when she'd grabbed the cast iron skillet and swung with every ounce of strength she possessed. She didn't know if Thomas was dead. She hadn't stayed long enough to find out. The moment his body hit the floor, she'd run, grabbing nothing but the shawl from the hook by the door. Now she was lost somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, following a creek upstream because she'd heard once that water led to civilization, though she was beginning to doubt the wisdom of that advice. The September sun was sinking behind the peaks when Victoria's legs finally gave out. She collapsed against a boulder, her vision swimming with exhaustion and hunger. She'd eaten nothing but wild berries for 2 days, and even those had run out yesterday morning. The temperature was dropping rapidly as evening approached, and her thin cotton dress provided little protection against the mountain chill. She must have dozed because she woke to the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Victoria's heart seized in her chest. Bear, her mind supplied helpfully. Mountain lion. Wolf. She'd heard stories about all the creatures that haunted these mountains, creatures that could tear a woman apart without breaking stride. But the figure that emerged from the trees was human, though only just. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the dying light. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin and fur, and carried a rifle with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to use it. His eyes, she noticed with a start, were a striking pale blue that seemed almost colorless in the twilight. "Please," Victoria whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and dehydration. "Please don't hurt me." The man stopped, those strange eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. She watched him note the blood on her dress, the bruises on her face that were turning from purple to green, the way she was trembling from cold and fear and exhaustion. "You hurt." His voice was deep and rough, as though he didn't use it often. Victoria shook her head, then reconsidered. "Not newly. I mean, I'm not injured now. The blood isn't mine." He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A murderer, a victim. Someone who'd crossed a line she could never uncross. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked finally. "No." The word came out as barely more than a breath. "I have nothing. No one." He was quiet for so long she thought he might just walk away and leave her there. Part of her almost hoped he would. But then he shifted his rifle to one shoulder and held out his free hand. "Name's Zachary Keller. Got a cabin about 2 miles north. You can stay the night, get some food in you, warm up by the fire. Tomorrow you can decide what comes next." Victoria stared at his outstretched hand. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust a strange man in the wilderness. But what choice did she have? She would die out here alone, and at least if he meant her harm, it would be quick. Surely it would be quicker than freezing to death in the dark. She placed her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle as he pulled her to her feet. When her legs buckled, he caught her with an arm around her waist. "When did you last eat?" Zachary asked. 2 days. Berries." He made a sound that might have been disapproval or sympathy. Without another word, he swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Victoria was too exhausted to protest. too worn down to do anything but rest her head against his chest and let him carry her through the darkening forest. True to his word, they reached a cabin in what felt like no time at all, though Victoria's sense of time had become unreliable. The structure was solid and well-maintained, built of thick logs with a stone chimney at one end. Zachary kicked the door open and carried her inside, setting her down gently in a chair near the cold fireplace. "I will get the fire started," he said, already moving to the hearth. "Then food." "You just sit." Victoria sat, because she lacked the strength to do anything else. She watched as Zachary moved around the cabin with efficient economy, building up the fire until warmth began to spread through the single room. The cabin was sparse but clean, with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools, and hooks on the walls holding various furs and equipment. Everything had its place. Everything was ordered and neat. It was the home of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. Once the fire was crackling, Zachary hung a pot over it and began adding things from his stores. Dried meat, wild onions, some kind of grain. The smell that soon filled the cabin made Victoria's stomach cramp with hunger. "You got a name?" Zachary asked, not looking at her as he stirred the pot. "Victoria, Victoria Morgan." "You running from the law, Victoria Morgan?" The question was direct and unexpected. Victoria's first instinct was to lie, but what was the point? If he turned her in, she was caught. If he didn't, the truth might be the only currency she had. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe, probably. My husband, he was hurting someone and then he was hurting me and I hit him with a skillet, hard. I didn't stay to see if he got back up." Zachary was quiet for a moment, still stirring. "When was this?" "3 days ago, in Denver." "Denver's a good 60 miles from here. You walked that?" "Most of it. I caught a ride on a freight wagon for part of a day, but the driver started looking at me strange, so I jumped off when we stopped for water." Zachary ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her along with a spoon. "Eat slow. Your stomach won't take kindly to rushing." The stew was the most delicious thing Victoria had ever tasted, though that might have been the hunger talking. She forced herself to take small bites, small sips, even though everything in her wanted to devour it all at once. Zachary watched her for a moment, then poured himself a bowl and sat at the table. "You got people in Denver?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "No people anywhere. My parents died when I was 16. Thomas was all I had, and now—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Now you got yourself," Zachary said. "That's not nothing." They ate in silence for a while. Victoria's hands had stopped shaking and warmth was finally seeping back into her bones. For the first time in 3 days, she didn't feel like she was about to die. "Why are you helping me?" she asked eventually. Zachary was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was low and measured. 8 years ago, my wife Sarah and I had a cabin down in South Park. One day I came back from checking traps to find our place burned, Sarah barely alive. Took her 3 days to die, and in that time she told me what happened. Man came through, asked for water, she gave it to him. He wanted more. She said no. He took it anyway, then beat her and left her to burn with the cabin. Victoria's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." "I spent a year tracking him. Found him in Kansas, working as a ranch hand under a different name. By then the law had forgotten about it. One dead woman in the mountains wasn't worth their time. So I made sure he understood what he'd done. Made sure he felt some of what Sarah felt. Then I came back here, built this cabin, and decided I was done with people. Then, why let me in? Because I know what it looks like when someone is running from something that would kill them. And I know what it looks like when someone fought back and is scared of what they've done. You got both those looks, Victoria Morgan, so I figured I'd offer you what nobody offered Sarah. A chance. Tears stung Victoria's eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since fleeing Denver. What if I killed him? What if I'm a murderer? Did you mean to kill him? I meant to make him stop hitting me. Then you're not a murderer. You're a survivor. There's a difference. Victoria finished her stew and Zachary took her bowl to refill it. She ate the second serving more slowly, feeling strength return to her limbs with each bite. Outside, full darkness had fallen and the wind was picking up. Inside, the fire crackled and warmth surrounded her like a blanket. "You take the bed," Zachary said when she'd finished eating. "I will sleep in my bedroll by the fire." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will." "You look like you're about to fall over." "Go on." Victoria was too tired to argue. She made her way to the bed in the corner, and when she lay down on the rough blankets, her body nearly wept with relief. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Zachary laying out his bedroll, his rifle within easy reach, his face thoughtful in the firelight. She woke once in the night, disoriented and afraid, but the sound of Zachary's steady breathing and the glow of banked embers reminded her where she was. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. She closed her eyes and slept again. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Victoria opened her eyes to find Zachary already awake, frying something over the fire that smelled heavenly. Eggs, she realized, and some kind of meat. "Got chickens out back," he explained when he noticed she was awake. "And I smoked some venison last week. Figure you could use a real breakfast." Victoria sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting. The exhaustion had faded, but 3 days of hard travel had left their mark. She accepted the plate he offered and ate with slightly more decorum than the night before, though the food was just as welcome. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I don't know how I can repay you." Zachary waved a hand dismissively. "No repayment needed." "But we should talk about what happens next." Victoria's stomach tightened. Of course. He'd given her a night's shelter and food, but she couldn't stay here. This was his home, his sanctuary. He'd already done more than anyone could expect. "I'll leave today," she said. "If you could point me toward the nearest town, I'll figure something out." "And do what? You got money?" "No, skills, trade," Victoria thought about it. "I can read and write, do figures. I kept the books for Thomas's freight business. I can cook and clean and sew, though not well enough that anyone would pay me for it." "You know anything about surviving out here? Hunting? Trapping? Reading weather, finding your way?" "No." Zachary nodded, as though this confirmed what he'd expected. "So you go to the nearest town, which is probably Fairplay, about 20 miles southeast. You got no money, no prospects, no references. What do you think happens to a woman alone in that situation?" Victoria knew exactly what happened. She'd seen it in Denver. Women without means had limited options, and most of those options led to the kind of life that ground you down until there was nothing left but bitterness and disease. "I don't have much choice," she said quietly. "You do," Zachary said. "You could stay here." Victoria stared at him. "What?" "Stay here. Winter's coming on and it gets hard up in these mountains. I could use help with things. You could learn what you need to know about surviving out here. Come spring, if you want to leave, you'll be stronger and better prepared. Maybe by then things will have settled down in Denver and you'll know whether the law is looking for you." "You want me to stay here? With you? Why?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Like I said last night, I've been alone up here for 7 years. I chose that, wanted that. But maybe it's time I stopped hiding from the world. And maybe you need somewhere to hide until you're ready to face it again. Seems like it could work for both of us. I wouldn't be taking charity. Charity nothing. You'd work. There's plenty to do around here. Cooking, mending, helping with the preserving and preparing for winter. Come spring, There's a garden needs planting, animals to tend. I'm offering you a job, Victoria. Room and board in exchange for labor, nothing more. The nothing more hung in the air between them. Victoria understood what he was saying. He wasn't expecting anything improper from her. He was offering her work and shelter, period. The relief that washed through her was so strong it made her dizzy. I accept, she said, and thank you, I'll work hard, I promise. I know you will, Zachary said. You walked 60 miles through mountain country with no food and no gear. Someone who can do that knows how to work hard. They spent that day establishing a routine. Zachary showed Victoria around the property, which was more extensive than she'd realized. Besides the cabin, there was a small barn housing 2 horses, a mule, and the chickens she'd smelled earlier. A smokehouse stood a little ways from the cabin, full of drying meat. A root cellar dug into the hillside held stores of vegetables, dried beans, and other provisions. A small stream ran behind the property, providing fresh water. Built all this myself, Zachary explained as they walked. After Sarah died, I needed to do something with my hands, needed to make something instead of destroying, so I came up here and I built. It's impressive, Victoria said, and meant it. The man had created a completely self-sufficient homestead in the middle of the wilderness. How long have you been here? 7 years in this spot. Spent the year before that drifting, hunting the man who killed Sarah. This cabin's 5 years old. Before that I lived in a smaller place, more of a shack really, but I kept improving, kept building. Gave me something to focus on besides the anger. Is the anger gone now? Zachary considered the question. No, but it's quieter, and most days it doesn't run my life anymore. Most days I can just be. They returned to the cabin, and Zachary began teaching Victoria the basics. How to bank the fire so it lasted through the night. Where he kept various supplies and how he liked things organized. How to collect eggs without startling the chickens. How to draw water from the stream and check it for safety. Victoria absorbed it all like a dry sponge, asking questions when she didn't understand, taking mental notes about everything. This was her life now, at least for the winter. She would master it. That evening they fell into an easy rhythm. Victoria cooked dinner using the supplies and the skills she had, while Zachary sat at the table repairing a leather harness that had cracked. They ate together, and afterward Victoria cleaned up while Zachary checked on the animals one last time. When he came back in, stamping snow from his boots, Victoria looked up in surprise. It's snowing, first snow of the season. Won't stick, not yet, but it's a reminder. We have maybe 4 weeks before the real weather hits. There's a lot to do before then. Over the following days, Victoria learned just how much a lot meant. Zachary worked from dawn until well after dark, and Victoria worked alongside him. They hauled firewood until Victoria thought her arms would fall off, stacking it under cover near the cabin. They butchered and smoked 2 deer that Zachary shot in the early mornings. They gathered the last of the wild plants, roots and herbs that Zachary knew how to identify and preserve. They reinforced the barn's roof and checked every inch of the cabin for gaps that would let in winter wind. Victoria had never worked so hard in her life. She went to bed each night exhausted, her muscles screaming, her hands blistered and raw. But she also went to bed with a sense of accomplishment she'd never known in Denver. She was learning, growing stronger, becoming someone new. Zachary was a patient teacher, though not a talkative one. He showed her how to do things, corrected her when she made mistakes, and praised her when she got something right. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, never made her feel stupid for not knowing something. It was so different from life with Thomas that sometimes Victoria found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Zachary to reveal that he was just like her husband after all, that the kindness was a mask hiding cruelty. But days turned into weeks, and the blow never came. Instead, she began to learn who Zachary Keller really was. He was a man who loved these mountains with a fierce, quiet passion. A man who could track a deer through territory where Victoria couldn't even see signs of its passing. A man who knew the name of every plant and the habits of every animal. A man who had taken his grief and his rage and transformed them into something productive, something that allowed him to survive. He was also, she began to realize, lonely. Oh, he'd chosen solitude, and he wore it comfortably like an old coat. But sometimes she'd catch him watching her as she worked, and she'd see something in his eyes that looked like hunger. Not physical hunger, though there was some of that too, but a hunger for connection, for another human voice, for the simple presence of someone who cared. Victoria understood that hunger because she felt it too. Thomas had isolated her systematically over their 4 years of marriage, driving away her friends, limiting her contact with neighbors, making her world smaller and smaller until he was all that existed in it. She'd been alone in a marriage that should have banished loneliness forever. Here, in a cabin in the mountains with a near stranger, she felt less alone than she had in years. One evening in early October, about 3 weeks after Victoria's arrival, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Zachary was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic sound of stone on steel almost meditative. Victoria was mending a shirt of his that had torn, her stitches getting neater with practice. "You never asked me more about Thomas," Victoria said suddenly. "About what happened that day." Zachary didn't look up from his work. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. If you didn't want to, that was your business." "I think I want to tell you. Then I will listen." Victoria set down her mending and stared into the fire. "I met Thomas when I was 17, about a year after my parents died in a cholera outbreak. I was working in a boarding house, barely making enough to rent a corner of a room. Thomas came through on business and he was so charming, handsome, successful. He courted me for 3 months, and I thought I was the luckiest girl alive when he asked me to marry him." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Zachary waited, patient as always. "The first time he hit me was 2 months after the wedding. I'd burned his dinner because I'd been ill all day, throwing up. I didn't know I was pregnant yet. He backhanded me so hard I saw stars, then apologized and cried and swore it would never happen again. I believed him." "They always swear that," Zachary said quietly. "The baby came early and stillborn. A girl, I never even got to name her. Thomas blamed me, said if I'd been a better wife, if I'd taken better care, she would have lived. Maybe he was right. He wasn't." The certainty in Zachary's voice made Victoria look up. His pale eyes were fixed on her, intense and unwavering. "A man who hits his wife doesn't get to blame her when bad things happen," he continued. "The world's full of hard luck and sorrow, but adding to it deliberately, that's a choice. Thomas made that choice. You were just trying to survive it." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes. "I stayed for 3 more years. It got worse. The hitting became regular. He controlled everything, the money, where I went, who I talked to. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? I had nothing, no one. And sometimes he was still the man I'd married. Kind. Gentle. Those moments kept me hoping things would get better. But they didn't. No, they got worse. And then 3 days before I ran, a young man came to the door with a letter. Just a boy, really, working for the postal service. Thomas saw me talking to him through the window. Just talking, nothing more. But Thomas went crazy. He dragged the boy inside and started beating him, screaming about me being unfaithful, about the boy trying to steal his wife. It was insane. The boy was maybe 18 and he was so scared." Victoria's voice broke and she took a moment to steady it. "I tried to pull Thomas off him. Thomas turned on me instead, started hitting me worse than he ever had before. I could feel something break in my face, taste blood, and I just knew that this was it. This was the time he was going to kill me. So when he turned back to the boy, I grabbed the skillet from the stove and I swung it at his head with everything I had. Did you check if he was breathing when he went down? No. I was too scared. I just ran. So I don't know if I killed him or just knocked him out. Either way, when he woke up or when someone found him, they'd know I did it. His word against mine, and I'm the one who ran. Who would believe me? Anyone with eyes who looked at your face would believe you, Zachary said. Those bruises didn't come from nowhere, and that boy, if he's smart, he'll tell the truth about what happened. Maybe, but I can't go back to find out. I can't ever go back. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Zachary said, "You did what you had to do to survive. That's not wrong. That's human. And whatever happened to Thomas, he brought on himself. You hear me, Victoria? He brought it on himself." Victoria nodded, wiping at her eyes. She felt lighter somehow, as though sharing the story had released some of the weight she'd been carrying. "Thank you for listening. For not judging. Nothing to judge. You're one of the strongest people I've met, and I've met quite a few." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's heart skip. She looked at him across the firelight, this big, gruff man who'd taken her in and asked nothing in return, who treated her with a respect and kindness she'd almost forgotten existed. And she felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dead for so long she'd thought it gone forever. But it was too soon, too complicated. She pushed the feeling down and picked up her mending again. The next morning, Victoria woke to find snow falling heavily outside. Zachary was already up, building up the fire against the cold. "We are stuck inside today," he announced. "Good day to work on indoor tasks. I need to organize my traps and repair some equipment. You could work on that mending pile if you want, or I can teach you how to tan hide. Your choice." "Teach me the hide," Victoria said immediately. Mending was familiar. She wanted to learn new things. Zachary's face split in what might have been a smile beneath the beard. "All right then. Fair warning, though. It's not pleasant work." He was right. Tanning hide was smelly, messy, and required strong arms and patience. But Victoria threw herself into it, determined to master this skill like all the others. Zachary worked alongside her, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he showed her the proper technique. They worked in companionable silence for hours, the kind of silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Every so often, Zachary would correct her grip or show her a better way to stretch the hide. Each time, his hands would brush against hers, and Victoria would feel that strange flutter in her chest again. By mid-afternoon, they were both ready for a break. Zachary made coffee, strong and bitter, and they sat at the table drinking it while the snow continued to fall outside. "Tell me about Sarah," Victoria said. "If that's all right. You've heard my story. I'd like to hear yours." Zachary's expression grew distant. "Met her when I was 20. I was working as a ranch hand down near Colorado Springs. She was the rancher's daughter, and she was beautiful. Not just her face, though that was lovely enough, but she had this light in her, this joy. She saw good in everything, even in a rough, angry kid like me. You were angry even then. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until the day he drank himself to death. I left home at 15, swearing I'd never be like him, but I had all this rage inside me, and I didn't know what to do with it. Sarah, she taught me. She showed me that anger could be channeled into work, into building something, into love." Zachary's voice had gone soft, almost tender. "We married when I was 22, her 20. Spent 6 happy years together. Built the cabin in South Park, ran a small trap line, lived simple but good. We were trying for a baby. Sarah wanted children so badly, and then one day I came home and found." He trailed off, his jaw tight. Victoria reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No," Zachary said, turning his hand over to grip hers. "It's all right. It was 8 years ago. The grief doesn't own me anymore, but I still miss her. Every day in little ways I miss her." They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped across the table, two people who'd lost different things but understood loss all the same. Then Zachary squeezed her hand once and let go, standing up to check on the fire. But something had shifted between them. Victoria felt it like a change in the weather. They were no longer just two people sharing a space out of necessity. They were becoming something else. Friends at the very least. Maybe, eventually, something more. The snow fell for 2 more days, trapping them inside the cabin. By necessity, they grew more comfortable with each other's presence. They worked side by side, prepared meals together, talked about everything and nothing. Victoria learned that Zachary had a dry sense of humor buried under his gruff exterior. Zachary discovered that Victoria had strong opinions about everything from politics to the best way to cook venison. They also learned to navigate the small space without awkwardness. The cabin had no privacy, no separate rooms. They changed clothes with backs turned, washed from the basin with the other facing away, maintained a careful respect for each other's dignity. It should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years rather than weeks. When the snow finally stopped and the sun came out, they emerged from the cabin like bears from a den, blinking in the bright light. There was work to do, paths to shovel, animals to check on. But Victoria noticed Zachary seemed more relaxed than before. The days of forced proximity hadn't driven him to retreat into silence. If anything, he seemed more open, more willing to talk. October rolled into November. The weather grew colder, and snow became more frequent. They'd finished most of the winter preparations, which meant there was time for other things. Zachary began teaching Victoria to shoot, setting up targets in the clearing behind the cabin. The rifle's kick bruised her shoulder at first, but she learned to anticipate it, to brace herself properly. Her aim was terrible initially, but gradually she began to hit the targets more often than she missed. "You're a natural," Zachary said one afternoon as Victoria managed to hit a mark 3 times in a row. "Better than I was when I started." "I doubt that," Victoria said, but she glowed with the praise nonetheless. "It's true. Took me months to get where you are after just a few weeks. You've got a good eye and steady hands." He was standing close behind her, adjusting her grip on the rifle. Victoria was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the solid strength. When he stepped back, she felt the loss of it. She took another shot, hitting the target dead center. When she turned to Zachary with a triumphant grin, she found him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not just pride in a student's progress, something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," Zachary said, but his voice had gone rough. "Just thinking how you've changed since you got here. That first night you looked like you might blow away in a strong wind. Now look at you, strong, capable. You're thriving out here." "I had a good teacher," Victoria said softly. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other, the air between them charged with something electric. Then Zachary cleared his throat and stepped back. "That's enough practice for today. We should get inside. There's a storm coming in tonight." He was right. By evening, snow was falling again, this time driven by wind that howled around the cabin's corners. They secured everything they could and retreated inside, where Zachary built up the fire until the small space was warm and cozy. After dinner, they sat by the fire as usual. But tonight felt different. The wind outside created a sense of isolation, as though they were the only two people in the world. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls. The cabin felt smaller, more intimate. "Victoria," Zachary said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about leaving? When spring comes, I mean. Do you think you'll want to go?" Victoria considered the question. A month ago, the answer would have been an immediate yes. This was temporary, a place to hide until she could figure out her life. But now, when she thought about leaving, her heart ached. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think about it sometimes, but this place, it's become home. More home than anywhere else has ever been, and you've become." She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "I've become what?" Zachary prompted, his pale eyes intense. "Important to me," Victoria said quietly. "These past 2 months, getting to know you, learning from you, just being around you, it's meant more to me than I know how to say." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're important to me too. More important than I expected, than I planned for. When you showed up that day, half dead from exhaustion, I told myself I was just helping someone who needed help. That come spring, you'd leave and I'd go back to my life alone. But the truth is, I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay." Victoria's heart was pounding. "Zachary, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you're still healing from what Thomas did to you. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just telling you how I feel. You've brought light back into this cabin, Victoria, into my life. And I don't want to lose that, don't want to lose you." Victoria stood up, crossed the small distance between them, and knelt in front of his chair. She took his hands in hers and looked up at him. "It's not too soon," she said. "Or maybe it is, but I don't care. I feel it too, Zachary. This pull between us. Every day it gets stronger. Every day I find myself thinking about what it would be like if this were permanent, if I stayed not just for the winter but forever." "Victoria," Zachary breathed. He reached out and cupped her face with one big hand, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Are you sure? I'm not an easy man. I've got darkness in me, grief and anger I'll probably carry till I die. And this life is hard, isolated, lonely sometimes, even with 2 people." "I've never been more sure of anything," Victoria said. "You've shown me what it means to be respected, to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. You've taught me strength I didn't know I had. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Zachary Keller. Completely and absolutely in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and true. For a moment, Zachary didn't move. Then he slid from the chair to kneel in front of her, pulling her into his arms. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "God help me, I love you so much." They held each other while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. When they finally pulled back to look at each other, Victoria saw tears in Zachary's eyes, the first emotion of that kind she'd seen from him. "I thought I'd never feel this again," he said. "After Sarah, I thought I was done, that I'd used up my one chance at love. But here you are, and I feel like I'm 20 years old again, like anything is possible." "Everything is possible," Victoria said. "We can make whatever life we want here." Zachary kissed her then, gentle and careful, as though she were made of something precious that might break. Victoria kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. All the gratitude and affection and love that had been building for weeks. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We should take this slow," he said. "Do this right." "What does right look like?" Victoria asked. "Well, for starters, I should probably ask you properly. Victoria Morgan, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Have children with me if we're blessed that way? Grow old with me in these mountains?" Joy flooded through Victoria so intensely it was almost painful. "Yes. Yes to all of it. I'll marry you, Zachary. I'll stay forever." They kissed again, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. It was fierce and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and grinning like fools. "We will have to go to town eventually," Zachary said. "Get you some proper clothes for winter, and we should get married legal with a preacher and papers." "After the spring thaw," Victoria suggested. "I'm not ready to face the world yet, and honestly, as far as I'm concerned, we're married now. The rest is just formality." "Agreed," Zachary said, "but you deserve a real wedding, a real start. So come spring, we will go to Fairplay, get married proper, and let the world know Victoria Morgan is now Victoria Keller." "Victoria Keller," she repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, Victoria didn't sleep in the bed while Zachary took the floor. They curled up together in the bed that would now be theirs, holding each other close while snow piled up outside. For the first time since childhood, Victoria felt completely safe, completely loved, completely home. The winter that followed was the happiest time of Victoria's life. Oh, it was hard work, no question. There were days when the temperature dropped so low they couldn't go outside at all, days when snow piled up so high they had to dig paths to the barn, days when the wind howled so loud they couldn't hear each other speak. But through it all, they had each other. They fell into an easy partnership, each knowing what needed to be done and doing it without having to be asked. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, likes and dislikes. They discovered they were both morning people who woke with the dawn. Both preferred savory food to sweet. Both loved sitting by the fire in the evening just talking about nothing in particular. They also learned each other's bodies, slowly and carefully. Zachary was patient and gentle, always mindful that Victoria was healing from years of abuse. There were moments when a sudden movement or loud sound would make her flinch, and Zachary would stop immediately, holding her until the fear passed. But gradually, Victoria learned to trust fully, to accept pleasure without waiting for pain to follow, to take joy in physical intimacy instead of enduring it. "You're beautiful," Zachary would tell her, and she would believe him because his eyes said the same thing. Christmas came, and they celebrated simply. Zachary shot a goose, and Victoria cooked it with wild herbs and the last of the stored vegetables. They didn't have gifts for each other, but Zachary surprised her by pulling out a harmonica and playing songs his mother had taught him as a child. Victoria sang along when she knew the words, her voice soft and a little off-key but full of joy. "Best Christmas I've had in years," Zachary said that night as they lay in bed. "Best Christmas I've ever had," Victoria replied and meant it. January brought the worst of the winter. The temperature stayed below freezing for weeks on end. They went through firewood at an alarming rate, and Zachary had to make several trips out in the freezing cold to bring more in from the store they'd built up. One of the chickens died, and Victoria mourned the loss more than she'd expected. But the others survived, still laying eggs despite the cold. In February, Victoria realized she'd missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the hard winter. But when another month passed with no sign, she began to suspect the truth. She waited until she was sure before telling Zachary. They were sitting at the table one evening, Zachary cleaning his rifle while Victoria mended socks. She set down her work and said, "I think I'm pregnant." Zachary's hands stilled. He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "You think or you know?" "I'm as sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I've missed twice now, and this morning I was sick to my stomach, and I just feel different, like something's changed inside me." Zachary set down the rifle carefully and came around the table. He knelt in front of her chair, placing both hands on her belly. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, suddenly nervous. They'd talked about children, but talking was different from the reality. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Zachary said, looking up at her with wonder in his eyes. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful beyond words. But yes, happy. So incredibly happy. He kissed her belly through her dress, and Victoria felt tears of joy spill down her cheeks. After losing her first child and spending years thinking she might never have another chance, this felt like a miracle. "We will need to get you to a doctor eventually," Zachary said. "Make sure everything is all right. And we should get married before the baby comes. Make sure it's all legal and proper." "Agreed," Victoria said. Once the snow melts enough to travel, March brought the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. The creek behind the cabin swelled with runoff. Birds returned to the mountains, their songs filling the air. And Victoria's belly began to swell with new life. Zachary was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He wouldn't let her do any heavy lifting, insisted she rest more, checked on her constantly. Victoria found it endearing even when it was a little annoying. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she'd tell him. "I know," he'd reply. "But I already lost one wife and one child. I can't lose you too." "I won't." The fear in his voice when he said it made Victoria gentle her teasing. She understood. He was haunted by what had happened to Sarah, terrified history might repeat itself. So she let him fuss over her, accepted his protectiveness as the love it was. In April, as soon as the main roads were clear, they made the journey to Fairplay. It took 2 full days of travel, camping one night on the trail. When they arrived, Zachary immediately found a doctor to examine Victoria. The doctor, an older man named Henderson, was thorough and professional. After his examination, he declared Victoria healthy and the pregnancy progressing normally. "Baby should come in late summer or early fall," he said. "Mrs. Keller, you're strong and healthy. I see no reason why this shouldn't go well. But you'll want to come back to town a few weeks before your due date, just to be safe." "She will be here," Zachary said firmly, "even if I have to carry her the whole way." They were married the next day in a simple ceremony at the town's small church. The preacher's wife and the doctor stood as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple blue dress they'd bought at the general store, the nicest thing she'd owned in years. Zachary wore clean buckskin and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Zachary kissed her in front of God and witnesses, Victoria felt a completeness she'd never known. This was right. This was real. This was forever. After the ceremony, they spent a day in Fairplay gathering supplies. Victoria was nervous about being in town, worried someone might recognize her description, might have heard about a woman fleeing Denver after attacking her husband. But if anyone connected her to that story, they gave no sign. She was just another mountain wife come to town with her husband. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, a friendly woman named Margaret, couldn't help but notice Victoria's condition. "When are you due?" she asked with a warm smile. "September," Victoria replied. "Your first?" Victoria hesitated, then said, "Yes." It was easier than explaining about the baby she'd lost. "How wonderful. You must be so excited. Will you come to town for the birth?" "We plan to," Zachary said. "Probably in late August." "You do that," Margaret said. "Dr. Henderson delivered all 4 of my children. He's good at what he does. And if you need a place to stay, my husband and I have rooms we rent out. Nice and clean, right near the doctor's office." "We may take you up on that," Victoria said gratefully. They left town the next morning, riding back toward the mountains with supplies loaded on the pack mule. Victoria felt lighter than she had in months. She was legally married now. Whatever had happened with Thomas was in the past. She was Victoria Keller, wife and soon-to-be mother, and the future stretched bright before her. Spring and summer on the mountain were glorious. The world exploded into green and gold as plants emerged from winter dormancy. Zachary planted an extensive garden, and Victoria helped when he'd let her, which was less and less as her belly grew. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. The streams ran cold and clear. Wildlife was everywhere, deer and elk, and even a bear that Zachary carefully scared away from the cabin. Victoria thrived. Her skin glowed, her hair grew thick and lustrous, her body grew round with the baby. She'd never felt healthier or more content. The morning sickness faded after a few weeks, and she found she had tremendous energy. She cooked and cleaned and tended the garden, sang while she worked, smiled constantly. Zachary couldn't keep his hands off her. He'd come up behind her while she was working and wrap his arms around her, hands resting on her belly. He'd kiss her neck and tell her how beautiful she was. At night, he'd talk to the baby, telling it stories about the mountains, about its mother's bravery, about the life they'd have together. "You're going to be such a good father," Victoria told him one night. "I hope so," Zachary said. "I never knew my father, not really. He was always either drunk or angry or both, so I don't have much of a model to work from, but I know what not to do at least." "You'll be wonderful," Victoria said with certainty. "You're patient and kind and strong. Our child is lucky to have you." In July, Victoria felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings inside her. She grabbed Zachary's hand and pressed it to her belly. "Did you feel that?" she asked. "I felt it," Zachary said, his face full of wonder. "That's our baby, our child moving and growing inside you. Victoria, I don't think I've ever felt anything as miraculous as this." As summer progressed, they began preparing for the trip back to Fairplay. They'd leave in mid-August, giving themselves plenty of time before the baby was due in September. Zachary arranged for a neighbor, a fellow trapper named Joseph who lived about 10 miles away, to check on their cabin and animals while they were gone. He packed supplies carefully, planning the trip down to the last detail. "I won't take any chances," he told Victoria. "We will travel slow and careful, camp when you need to rest. I'm not going to let anything happen to you or the baby." "I know," Victoria said, touching his face. "I trust you completely." They left on August 15th, taking 5 days to make the journey that should have taken 2. But Zachary insisted on the slow pace, and Victoria was grateful. The baby was heavy in her now, making riding uncomfortable. They stopped frequently to rest, and Zachary helped her down from the horse each time with infinite care. When they finally reached Fairplay, they went straight to Margaret's boarding house and rented a room. Dr. Henderson examined Victoria again and declared everything progressing perfectly. "Another few weeks," he predicted. "Baby's big and healthy from what I can tell. Should be a strong one." They settled into a routine in Fairplay. Victoria rested while Zachary did odd jobs around town to earn a bit of extra money. They'd brought furs to trade, but Zachary was the type of man who needed to keep busy. He helped at the stable, did carpentry work, fixed things for people. Victoria spent her days preparing baby clothes, talking with Margaret and the other women in town, trying to be patient as she waited. The pain started on September 3rd, a week earlier than expected. Victoria woke in the pre-dawn hours with cramping in her back and belly. She shook Zachary awake. "It's time," she said. Zachary was up and moving instantly. He helped her dress, then went to fetch Dr. Henderson while Victoria paced the room, breathing through contractions. Margaret came up to sit with her, offering calm reassurance. "You're going to do just fine," she said. "First babies take a while usually. You just breathe and stay calm." Dr. Henderson arrived and examined her. "You've got a while yet," he confirmed. "But everything looks good, normal and healthy. Just let your body do what it knows how to do." The labor lasted through that day and into the night. It was painful and exhausting and frightening at times, but Victoria held onto Zachary's hand and focused on the end goal. The baby. Their child. The future they'd created together. Finally, as dawn broke on September 4th with one last tremendous effort, Victoria pushed their child into the world. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. "It's a boy," Dr. Henderson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Zachary was crying openly, tears streaming down his face into his beard. Victoria was crying too, from pain and relief and overwhelming joy. The doctor cleaned the baby and placed him in Victoria's arms. He was perfect. Tiny and red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same pale blue as his father's. He had Zachary's nose and Victoria's mouth, and he was the most beautiful thing Victoria had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name him?" Zachary asked, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant gripped it reflexively, and Zachary made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Victoria knew. "Ethan," she said. "Ethan Thomas Keller." Zachary looked at her in surprise. "Thomas, after your husband, after what I survived," Victoria said. "And to remind us both that from terrible things, good things can come. I wouldn't wish those years back for anything, but they led me here. To you, to him. So yes, Thomas as a middle name, but Ethan because it means strong and enduring, and that's what I want for our son." "Ethan Thomas Keller," Zachary repeated. "It's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for this life, for everything." They stayed in Fairplay for 2 weeks after Ethan's birth, giving Victoria time to recover before the journey home. Dr. Henderson checked on them regularly and declared both mother and baby thriving. Margaret and the other women brought food and baby clothes and advice. Victoria had never had female friends before, and she found she liked the camaraderie, the shared experience of motherhood. But as much as she appreciated the kindness, she was eager to get back to the mountain. Back to their cabin, their home. She wanted to raise Ethan in the place where she'd found herself, where she'd learned to be strong. The journey back took 7 days, even slower than the trip down. Ethan was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping for long stretches, but they still had to stop frequently to tend to him. Zachary was even more protective than before, scouting ahead to make sure the trail was safe, helping Victoria on and off the horse with extreme care, checking on them both constantly. When the cabin finally came into view, Victoria felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. They were home. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Ethan needed constant care, nursing every few hours around the clock. Victoria was tired in a way she'd never experienced, a bone-deep weariness that came from interrupted sleep and the demands of a newborn. But every time she looked at her son, every time she saw Zachary cradling him or singing to him or just staring at him in wonder, the exhaustion seemed worth it. Zachary threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He made a cradle for Ethan from pine wood, carving it smooth and decorating it with simple designs. He stayed up with Victoria during night feedings, keeping her company even though there was little he could do to help. He changed diapers without complaint, soothed Ethan when he cried, talked to him constantly about everything and nothing. "You think he understands?" Victoria asked one day, watching Zachary explain to Ethan the proper way to track a deer. "Not yet," Zachary said, "but someday he will. And I want him to know his father's voice, to trust it the way I never trusted mine." As fall turned to winter, they fell into new rhythms. Victoria learned to cook and clean and care for the cabin while managing a baby. Zachary took over even more of the outdoor work, refusing to let Victoria do anything that might be dangerous while she was tired from night feedings. Ethan grew and thrived. By Christmas, he was smiling. By January, he was laughing, a sound that filled the cabin with joy. By March, he was sitting up on his own, his pale blue eyes taking in everything around him with curiosity. "He's going to be smart," Victoria predicted. "Look how he studies everything." "He gets that from his mother," Zachary said. "And stubborn from his father," Victoria added with a laugh, as Ethan grabbed a wooden spoon and refused to let go despite their attempts to take it away. That spring, Victoria realized she was pregnant again. Part of her wanted to wait, to have more time with just Ethan before adding another child. But mostly she was thrilled. She'd always wanted a large family, and now that dream was coming true. "2 babies in 2 years, Zachary said when she told him. "We move fast." "Is that all right?" Victoria asked. "All right, it's wonderful. I love our growing family. Love that this cabin is filling up with life and noise and chaos. Love that we're building something together." Their second child, a girl they named Sarah after Zachary's first wife, was born in November of 1874. She was smaller than Ethan had been, with Victoria's dark hair and Zachary's eyes. Zachary cried when he held her for the first time, and Victoria knew he was thinking of his Sarah, the wife who'd never gotten to have children. "She would be happy about this," Victoria told him. "Happy that her name lives on. Happy that you found love again." "I think so too," Zachary said. "I think both our lost loves would be happy. Thomas, wherever he is, can't hurt you anymore. Sarah is at peace. And we're here, alive and building something beautiful. That's what matters." The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, another boy named James and finally another girl named Emma. The cabin that had once housed a solitary man bitter with grief became a home full of laughter and toys, and the controlled chaos of raising 4 children. It wasn't always easy. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, summers when drought threatened the garden, moments of sickness that scared them both. There were also the normal struggles of raising children, the arguments and accidents and endless work. But through it all, Victoria and Zachary's love remained strong. They'd started as 2 broken people hiding from their pasts. But together, they'd built a future. They'd taken their pain and loss and used it to create something good, something lasting. Their children grew up knowing they were loved, knowing their father would never raise a hand in anger, knowing their mother was strong and capable and brave. Ethan grew into a thoughtful boy who loved tracking animals with his father. Sarah was fiery and independent, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. James was gentle and loved plants, spending hours helping his mother in the garden. Emma, the baby, adored everyone and everything, spreading sunshine wherever she went. The family went to Fairplay twice a year, spring and fall, to trade furs and buy supplies and see Dr. Henderson. Each time, Victoria would think about the woman she'd been when she first arrived in these mountains. Desperate, terrified, convinced she was a murderer. She'd never gone back to Denver, never tried to find out what had happened to Thomas. In those early years, she'd feared a lawman might show up at the cabin to arrest her. But as time passed and no one came, she began to believe she was truly free. Either Thomas had survived and been too ashamed to admit his wife had bested him, or he'd died and people assumed Victoria had died too, somewhere in the wilderness. Either way, she was safe. She was Victoria Keller, mountain wife and mother of 4. The past was truly past. One evening in the summer of 1881, Victoria and Zachary sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, Ethan reading to the younger ones from one of the precious few books they owned. Victoria rested her head on Zachary's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in that day, I brought nothing but trouble and complications into your peaceful life." "Not even once," Zachary said. "You brought light, Victoria, life, love, everything that matters. I was existing before you came, surviving, but I wasn't living. You taught me how to live again." "You taught me how to be strong," Victoria said, "how to value myself, how to love without fear. I was so broken when I found you." "We were both broken," Zachary corrected. "We just healed each other. That's what love does. It doesn't fix everything, but it makes the broken parts bearable. It makes life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Inside, they could hear Ethan's voice rise and fall as he read, punctuated by Sarah's questions and James's giggles and Emma's delighted squeals. "I love you," Victoria said. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. Thank you for seeing me that day, for not walking past, for giving me shelter and a future." "I love you too," Zachary said, "and you gave me just as much. A reason to keep living, a family. A home instead of just a house. We gave each other everything that matters." The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Victoria thought about the path that had led her here, all the pain and fear and desperate decisions. If someone had told her, that night she fled Denver, that she'd end up here in the mountains, loved and safe and surrounded by children, she never would have believed it. But life had a way of surprising you, of taking your worst moments and somehow, impossibly, transforming them into the best ones. She'd run from a cruel past and found a man who gave her shelter when she needed it most. And together, they'd built a future neither had dared to imagine. Inside, the children were laughing. Beside her, Zachary's breathing was slow and steady. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. And Victoria Keller, once Victoria Morgan, once a terrified woman running through the wilderness, was finally, completely home. The years continued to unfold with a rhythm as steady as the seasons. Ethan grew into a young man who was the perfect blend of his parents, with Zachary's strength and skill in the wilderness combined with Victoria's thoughtfulness and compassion. When he turned 18 in 1892, he announced his intention to marry a girl from Fairplay named Caroline, and Victoria cried happy tears at her son's wedding. Sarah, true to her childhood nature, became a skilled horsewoman and trapper, working alongside her father and eventually taking over much of the trap line when Zachary's knees started bothering him in his 50s. She never married, declaring she was too wild for any man, and Victoria respected her daughter's choice to forge her own path. James became the town's unofficial plant expert, helping farmers improve their crops and identifying medicinal herbs that Dr. Henderson used in his practice. He married a quiet girl named Ruth, and they settled in Fairplay, though they visited the mountain cabin often. Emma, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher. She opened a small school in Fairplay and dedicated herself to educating children who might otherwise grow up illiterate. She married a blacksmith named David, and they had 3 children who adored their mountain grandparents. As Victoria and Zachary aged, they began to slow down. The endless work of maintaining a mountain homestead became harder. Their children tried to convince them to move to Fairplay to take it easier in their old age. "We are fine right where we are," Zachary would insist. "I'll die in these mountains. I won't die in some town house." "Then we will die in the mountains together," Victoria would add, taking his hand. And that's exactly what they did. Not immediately, not young, but eventually, as all people must. Victoria was 72 when she passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1916, Zachary holding her hand as he'd done for 44 years. She'd lived to see her children grown, her grandchildren born, and even 2 great-grandchildren. She'd lived to see the world change dramatically, with automobiles and electricity and all manner of modern wonders. But through it all, the cabin in the mountains remained her home, and Zachary remained her love. Zachary followed her 6 months later at the age of 76. The doctors said it was his heart, but his children knew better. He'd lived 8 years without Sarah, but he couldn't live without Victoria. The day after her death, a light had gone out in his eyes. He continued on, maintained the cabin, visited with his children and grandchildren. But everyone could see he was waiting, counting the days until he could join the woman he loved. When he passed, it was spring, the season of renewal and growth. Sarah found him in his chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains he'd loved so well, a slight smile on his weathered face. In his hand was a letter, one he'd apparently been writing to Victoria. Sarah read it through tears. It was full of memories of love, of gratitude for the life they'd shared. The last line read, "You ran from cruelty and I gave you shelter, but you gave me so much more. You gave me a reason to live, a family to love, a future I thought I'd lost forever. I'm coming to find you now, my love. Wait for me." They buried Zachary next to Victoria on a hillside overlooking the cabin, with a view of the mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. The entire family came, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love between a mountain man and a woman who'd run from her past. At the funeral, Ethan spoke about his parents' love story, about how his mother had arrived with nothing but trauma and fear, and how his father had given her space to heal and grow. About how they'd built a life together from scratch, 2 broken people who made each other whole. About how their love had been quiet and steady and strong, lasting through decades and challenges and all the complications of life. "They taught us what love really means," Ethan said. "Not the easy passion of youth, though they had that too, but the deep, abiding commitment to stand by someone through everything. To build a life together day by day, year by year. To choose each other again and again, no matter what. That's the legacy they left us. That's what we should carry forward." The cabin stayed in the family. Sarah lived there until her own death at 93, maintaining it as her parents had. After her, James's grandchildren took it over, preserving it as a family gathering place. Generations of Kellers would return to that cabin in the mountains, would sit on the porch looking at the sunset, would tell the story of Victoria and Zachary. The story of how she'd run from a cruel past, how he'd given her shelter, and how together they'd built a future neither had dared to imagine. A love story that started with fear and survival and became something beautiful, something lasting, something that echoed through generations. And in the end, that was everything. Not the pain they'd known before they met, not the hardships they'd faced together, but the love, always the love. Deep and true and strong enough to weather any storm, to overcome any obstacle, to last beyond death itself into the memories of those they'd left behind. Victoria Morgan had fled Denver in terror, certain her life was over. Instead, she'd found Zachary Keller, and together they'd proven that it was just beginning. That from cruelty could come kindness, from desperation could come hope. From 2 broken people could come a love story for the ages, played out in a cabin in the Colorado mountains, witnessed by stars and trees and children who carried that love forward into the future. It was a simple story in many ways. No grand adventures, no dramatic rescues beyond that first meeting. Just 2 people choosing each other day after day for more than 4 decades. building a life, raising a family, growing old together, finding in each other everything they'd been missing, everything they'd needed, everything that made life worth living. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.